Welcome, my name is Steve Barrett and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of PRWeek. I'm delighted to be here at Ogilvy's offices with two very influential gentlemen in the PR agency world to talk about the world of PR and especially how agencies have been doing over the last 12 months. This is to coincide with PRWeek's special agency business report, which is one of our biggest issues of the year. Gents, Chris Graves.
Thanks,
Chief Executive of Ogilvy PR. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us to your facility. And of course, Richard Edelman, President and Global Chief Executive of Edelman. Great to see you, Richard.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you both gentlemen, I'll start with you, Chris. Obviously, it's been a very tough 12 months in business generally. How have you found that at Ogilvy, and what particular challenges has that thrown up, and how have you had to adapt your business over the last 12 months?
Well, it was, but I think you can't generalize by global or even by continent. I mean, what we discovered was that, for example, we had a number, somewhere in the range of 20 countries that actually had record earnings and profits last year, even in the midst of this storm. Clearly there were others that got hit, though. So I think it was a bit of a patchwork quilt rather than an across-the-board thing. In the areas that got hit harder, they were more about cost management, frankly. They were looking to do a great job with declining revenues of protecting the bottom line. I think by and large we did that. So in whole, overall, worldwide, we had a record year for Asia Pacific. But in the global figures, we were off on revenues a few points and flat on profits year over year.
And you actually said in the piece, in the agency business report, that people were coming to PR as opposed to other services to actually help them through this recession.
Well, I think that what happens is anytime you get one of these big cataclysmic shocks, people do a reevaluation. They reevaluate budgets, they reevaluate effectiveness, they look at, how can we do this better? So we had to be tougher in terms of choices we made and what have you. But again, in many countries, they looked at us and looked at any sort of global sort of pronouncement about a tough year and said, what tough year?
Yeah, so it varied from
very much
region to region. Richard, you managed to keep revenues flat, which is good in this market, but you actually increased your headcount. Was that a conscious decision to do that, in a market, and what was the rationale behind that?
Well, in our case, private company, that helps. We looked at this as an opportunity to get market share, and we believe that we've gained that position. We think we're number 2 now among all firms, and we also saw much more of the corporate brand kind of work going across. In a trust deficit world, you need corporate reputation. Brands looked at us and said, gee, this digital budget doesn't necessarily go to the ad agency, as you said, so we have a really good opportunity to get that pocket. And so we found that big clients, eBay, Starbucks, others, said, we don't care where the idea comes from. If you have a good idea, let's go. You lead, move. Yeah.
So are we still nervous about a double bounce? Are we still nervous that there's going to be a double dip recession?
I don't think so in the United States. I think that there is some possibility in a couple of markets in Europe. I don't see that in Asia Pacific. I think that there was a fairly short period of time of trouble, China, India, but then, come sort of April, May last year, you started to see it coming back. And I do want to contrast this sharply to 2001 to 2003 recession, where PR got slaughtered. A lot of firms, Weber Shandwick, Ogilvy, others got dropped by 30–40% because they were very tech related. Tech this time has been just fine, just fine.
Do you think it's tech, but do you think also that PR has come of age a little bit in those intervening years and is now taken a lot more seriously at the top table?
Absolutely, because the challenges that companies are facing are one of, multiplicity of stakeholders, the advent of government into the decision process. All these things, and environmentalism, CSR, all these things play to PR strength, and the dispersion of media that's happened in the interim means that we're the best guys to go into these conversations.
That's a good message to carry forward. I mean, Richard brought this subject up, so Chris, clearly it must be better to be an independent firm to prosper in a modern PR environment. What would you say to that?
I would say to this, if you think that money means anything less to Richard than it does to me or to Martin Sorrell, I think you'd be nuts. So I don't think that there's necessarily an inherent advantage to not being listed. I think of course, we won't know because they don't have to be transparent in the same way. But I think that the difference for us as a network is it's not just Ogilvy. This is the big thing to remember. And let me give you a couple of examples, because otherwise it could be just sort of happy talk about collaboration. Some of the largest clients we work with are with our sister agencies within WPP, and it goes beyond PR. So for example, when we work with Ford, it's with a whole bevy of agencies within WPP. When we work with LG, it's with our sister agencies within WPP. So it allows the client to now, clients we've heard recently from, and a big summit we held in Istanbul and brought top clients to speak to us, they really don't want to do the hard work of picking by discipline anymore. In fact, who can tell what a discipline is? Where does digital sit? Where does digital influence sit? Everybody lays claim to it. So what they want is to be able to come to you with a business issue and say, what are the ideas, the creative ideas, and the communication ideas that are going to drive my business or reputational issue? So they've even gone bigger than one agency now into giant conglomerates and networks for best of breed across everything.
We're talking advertising and media as well. So.
Absolutely, and there are some really cutting-edge digital acquisitions made within WPP that are made available to Ogilvy to use as part of your team.
So Richard, devil's advocate, you can't compete, can you? You haven't got those relationships. You're just a PR specialist. Not putting that down, that's what we're all about. But the world is getting smaller. Clients are more likely to put their media, advertising and PR in the same group. How can you compete in that environment?
Well, if that were the correct thesis, we would have a different ownership structure. It's just not true. In fact, we work oftentimes with Ogilvy Advertising or BBDO or any of the other holding companies' ad units or digital units, and we sit at the same table and we're able to act very robustly in terms of, here's the PR remit and this is our view, and in fact, we think that there's a tremendous advantage to the independent play because we've developed a very strong digital presence where we don't have a sister agency elbowing us for revenue. So that's the other side of the coin. Yeah. Chris has certain advantages, God knows, and we have the other side.
I agree with that.
Okay, well, we've talked about the last 12 months. Let's look forward a bit. What are the biggest issues for you at the moment, Richard?
For me, there's a great opportunity in trying to persuade every one of our clients that they can become media companies. Very little crazy idea, but we've hired Richard Sambrook off the BBC, former director of editorial, and you know him well. Yeah. Chris probably knows him from journalism days. And our idea is, in fact, that with the shrinkage of authority media, that there's going to be a bigger place for companies' own websites. And those websites must not be press kits. They must actually be a place for discussion, a place where others can contribute content. And we think that Sambrook has a real great knowledge of how to do that and how to attract eyeballs. And it has to be fair, and it has to be good side and bad side of products or corporate brand.
So you're actually going into areas that might traditionally have been handled by a digital agency or a media agency.
Or a newspaper or a television network.
Correct, Chris.
It's content creation. And I think content creation, I agree with Richard on that. Content creation becomes more and more important, but it's not necessarily what people may picture in old traditional media content creation. And it's not necessarily just a static PDF white paper either that nobody reads. It is very hyper-speed, dynamic thing that gets talked about, gets passed around, that adds some value in terms of thinking.
Okay, last question, gentlemen. I wanted to put to both of you, but slightly different angle. Chris, Richard's getting into content. You've spent 20 years or 20 years plus of your life in that. What advice would you give to Richard on getting into content? And Richard, Chris is a relative newcomer to the PR world. What advice would you give to him on succeeding in the PR world? First up to you, Chris.
Richard, my first piece of advice is never, ever, ever hire a former media or news guy. They're disasters. Okay. Seriously, no. But getting into the content business is right way, actually, and I think they're smart in taking that approach. I think that how one defines content has outstripped traditional media thinkers. This is the problem. So the only counsel I would have is that they don't necessarily have to have a high title in traditional media to be great thinkers in creating content.
Okay, and they could be young people fresh out of college.
100%. Yeah.
And Richard, your advice to Chris?
Chris has the best agency in Asia Pacific. It's clearly his background, and I would use that as the strongest strategic weapon for the firm, because you build off of your base. You don't try to compete with others where you're not as strong. Use what you have and go off of that.
Well, thanks, gents, for your time over the last 10 minutes. Some fascinating points there. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Richard.
Anytime.
My name's Steve Barrett. I'm the editor-in-chief of PRWeek, and that was our special report to tie in with our agency business report. You'll find lots of other facts and content related to the report on our website, and of course the print edition. So thanks for that, and we'll see you next time on PRWeek.